Welcome to Sew with Mrs. Herbert. Today we're going to learn about pattern symbols, the pattern guide sheet, the cutting layout, pinning the pattern onto the fabric, and we'll actually be cutting out our project. First thing we need to do is to get our pattern guide sheet out of the envelope. So let's take a look. It's got 2 pages, front and back. And on page 1 of 4, we've got a picture here. It's kind of too small for you to see. So what I did was, for each one of these sections, I enlarged it. So this quadrant is 1 page, here's another, and then this I divided into 3 pages. So let's look at my enlarged version. It wasn't until I really started looking at this that I noticed some little tiny lines there. And then I realized as I looked over here, it says 10 pocket. So this pants or shorts actually has pockets. Now we hadn't discussed that before, so you can put pockets in your pants or leave them out. And as I demonstrate for you, I'm actually going to put a pocket on one side, leave the other off, so that you can see either way. But that was a discovery here. Usually on the envelope back, when it says what you're making, it'll say with pockets or doesn't say without, but it'll tell you. So that was just like, oh, surprising. And then I realized, oh, there's little tiny lines there that I didn't notice before. So sometimes you've got to put on your magnifying glasses. All right, let's look at this closer then. So we have our views. We look at this and we can see a diagram of each of the pattern pieces. They're numbered, and then here they're numbered and named, and the A, B, or C is to indicate what view that we will be doing. So in this case, we've got back is piece 9. We need front, piece 8, and then the pocket, piece 10. All right. Now, when we go to the upper right corner of the pattern guide sheet, this is like a glossary, and there's a lot of important information, but it can be really overwhelming at first. So when it comes to the symbols on your pattern, we're going to be using most of these, and I've enlarged them to show you actually on the pattern where they are. So grain line, place on fold. Here it says center, front, or back of a garment. The notches, dots, sometimes they're squares. Cutting line, lengthen or shorten lines. So I'll be showing you most of those on our pattern. Tells you our seam allowance is 5/8 of an inch, unless otherwise stated. And it says it's not printed on the multi-size patterns. Back in the olden days when I was first learning to sew, it would actually show you the space between the sewing line and the cutting line. Now, down here, it's telling you sew your garment according to the instructions, tells you to pin, stitch 5/8, press the seams, and then it tells you about clipping and trimming. So that we don't get ahead of ourselves, we're not going to talk about trimming right now because we only need it one section in our garment that we're making. So we'll look at this when the time comes or talk about it. Now up here, cutting and marking. It tells you to pre-shrink your fabric. Circle your cutting layout. We always do that, and I usually use pencil. Pin the patterns onto the fabric. Tells you some more about how to fold your fabric. And then after cutting, transfer markings to wrong side of fabric before removing the pattern. Use pins, a chalk method. It says, or dressmaker's tracing paper and wheel. Back when I was a little girl first sewing, we always used tracing paper and a tracing wheel. Now we don't use it so often. We tend to use these other 2 methods. So if you have a grandma, great-grandma that has these, by all means, feel free to use them. But it'll save you a little money if you use the pin method or chalk method, or I use a pencil. Now, to quick mark. Snip edge of fabric to mark notches, ends of fold lines, and center lines. Totally ignore that. That is not a good idea for beginners, and it's not a safe idea for those who are very skilled in sewing. I do not mark by cutting into the seam allowance. So cross that out. That's a no-no. Now here it says pin mark dots. Yes, you'll poke a pin in, and I'll show you that with our project. We'll put a mark with the pencil where that pin is and the seam allowance so that it's where you need it. You can see it, but it doesn't show through on the right side of what you're making because it is just in the seam allowance. Okay, then here, more information about how you lay out fabric under special circumstances. So I encourage you to read all this and study this before you get started. Now, the bottom left of our pattern guide sheet, it says cutting layouts. So here's our legend, all right, showing you the different shades of what the wrong side of the fabric, the right side, the pattern piece with printed up, the pattern piece with printed down. So that's all important to be able to understand what you're seeing here. Now this is the cutting layout for top A. It tells you all the pieces you need. And then it says this drawing is for fabric that's 45 inches wide. And it says with nap. That means a one-way design. It means you could think of corduroy. You need to smooth it one direction. I also, if I have like flowers that are only going one way, I would use that with nap picture. So you might see another one that says without nap, and they've got pieces turned different ways, but that's not the case here. So anyway, I'm not making top A. I don't need this. If I was making with 60-inch wide fabric, this is it. So we looked at it, but we don't need this. So we're going to the center. Interfacing for A, we're not doing A, so we don't need this. Pants B, we're finally where we need to be. Use pieces 8, 9, and 10. 45-inch wide fabric with nap, all sizes. So regardless what size I make, this is the picture I'm going to use. Now I'm just going to double check over here. It says 60-inch. As I used 100% cotton, most likely it's going to be 45. So check the width of your fabric and then circle the cutting layout. And I'm going to do that right now. So I get a pencil and I circle it. Now, if you want to use a pen or you want to use a highlighter, that's fine too. I usually just use a pencil in case I use this pattern again and need a different cutting layout so that I'm not getting confused. Now let's continue to look then. This one said short C, and I'm not making shorts. So we already identified on the pattern guide sheet that this is how we're going to place our pieces onto the fabric. So at this point, we're going to get our pieces, pattern pieces out of the pattern envelope. Wow, this is really big, and it's very fine paper, like tissue paper that you gift wrap with. And so when I open this up, you can't see all of it on the camera. There's actually two. Or no, I'm wrong. One big slip that goes way, my arm stretched out from one arm to the other. Now, again, all these pieces, but what are the ones I needed? I needed 8, 9, and 10. When I cut those pieces out, I am not going to cut on this dark line. That's the cutting line when I cut my fabric. I'm going to cut between the pieces. So when I come back, I will have pieces 8, 9, and 10. And then I'll show you the pattern symbols that we're using on those pieces. These are the pattern symbols that we'll be addressing on the project we're making. The first one, the cutting line. It's a solid line. On our pattern, it's the line right here that goes all the way around. Now, that cutting line can get a little confusing because there's multiple pattern sizes here. I'm making a size 4. And so what I could do, so that I can focus on my one size, I could use a highlighter and draw around there if I wanted to take the time. It's thought that, no, it's no problem. I can follow that. This is just an idea for a help. Okay, but the cutting line is the solid line that we use. And I say solid, but it's deceptive because this one's dot dash, this one's skipping spaces. So they're not always perfectly solid, but you get the idea. It's the outside for the size that we're using. So that's the cutting line. Now, the grain line, I move these aside. It's this line right down the center here with an arrow. Typically they're on both ends. Doesn't matter, it's the grain line. And that we want the grain line to be parallel to the selvage. Remember we learned those terms, selvage and fold? So that grain line follows the lengthwise grain of the fabric parallel to the selvage. So those are two important symbols. Now, we have what's called notches. There's a single, a double, and a triple. And the older patterns, you'd have you cut, so there's your cutting line, cut here, snip up one side of the diamond, go across, and snip down the second one and continue, so that you're not having little points in and out. So we still do that. However, on the pattern today, and so we've got the single, we snip out over like that. And the triple, make it one long one. So they're just wider. Okay, a point, a little bit wide, and wider than that. So those are the notches. But nowadays, when you have multiple patterns, sizes, you can see that the notch here with 3, it'll only show half of it, because if they showed the whole thing, it would cut off part of size 4 notch and 5 and 6 and so forth. They're all on top of each other, and that would be messy and difficult to figure out what's what. So they only put in half a notch. And remember I said don't cut into your seam allowance, because nowadays they say, oh, just make a little snip there. It's too easy to accidentally cut too far and end up past your seam allowance and into your actual garment. You know, you'd be in the side of your pants. So don't use a snip mark. Instead, I'm highlighting the size 4, but what I do is, I don't usually highlight it, I just draw it. So I want my single notch to look like that. I want it to look like a diamond. So I'll draw it out. So now when I cut, I'll be cutting along this line. I'll cut out, use the point of my scissors to cut in to that line, and then continue. So on each one of these, I'm going to search and find all the notches for size 4. So here's one. So I'm going to draw it out and fill it in so it's easy for me to see there's a notch. Let's see if there are any more. Not down here, not around. Oh, here's a double notch. So I'm going to draw it. I don't have to draw 2 points. I can just draw it out, go across. So I'm going to, when I cut along this line, up, across, and down, and then keep going. So this notch is a double notch. It's wider than a single notch. Okay, I've got my notches marked. Now we mentioned matching dots. Notice these are both large matching dots. Sometimes a pattern would have them different sizes so that you know which way, in this example, maybe this one would be large and this would be small, so that you know, oh, this is the way your pocket goes. In this case, they're exactly the same, so you could accidentally get your pocket on upside down. So pay attention to where your waist is when you're putting your pocket on. But that's a reason to have different sizes of dots, matching dots, if they did make it that way. And then there's also matching squares. If they use up the sizes of dots, we've used up, 1, 2, 3 sizes of notches, then we go to different shapes like squares. Okay, so now here, there's this circle also tells you, okay, there's some information for you. It's over here too. So they're telling you, after you've sewn your side seams for a size 4, that this pair of pants is going to be 26.5 inches at the hip. And it's saying over here at the waist for size 4, it's also going to be 26.5 inches. So we know it just slides up. Anything else? Here we see it's telling you the hem line for each of the different sizes. So if I'm making the 4, this is where I have the length of the pants and then come back up. All right. Let's examine, this is piece 8, the front of the pant. So let's look at piece 9, the pant back. All right. On this one, I see the crotch line indicated. Do you remember the picture I showed you in an earlier episode about measuring? We sat in a chair, we measured from our waist to the chair, and that was our crotch length. I've already examined this, and the crotch length for this little girl works out just right for the waistline to her crotch. So no changes need to be made. But if yours showed that your crotch length was not the same or not within a 1/4 inch close, then you would want to follow those general directions on the guide sheet to make an adjustment. You'd be cutting it, splitting it, or folding it up so that you would have the right crotch length. Okay, let's continue. So here we have our single notches. Let's go ahead, size 4, draw them. And yes, I really do this, okay? Not just showing it for you. And then across. And let's make that a little straighter. I'm going to fill it in to show that I'm going to cut this across. So there's my triple notch. So that's the back of the pant, center back. All right, what else do we have? Here's the size 4 I'm following. Here's a notch, a single notch. So let me draw that so that I remember to cut around. And then I look up, there's my hemline's going to be. Okay, there's a dot I'm going to be marking later. So my notches are marked and complete. This one's ready to be able to pin it onto my pattern. And the last one was the pocket. So let's see if there are any notches. And yes, you turn this over. So there's a double notch right here. If you want to draw the diamonds, be my guest, but just draw the line across so that you remember to cut it all the way across. Okay, so we just made a double notch on the bottom of the pocket. Now here's a single notch, almost missed it. So we'll make a diamond there so that I remember to cut that out. Those will be marked on the fabric later. So we're set. When I come back, I'll have my fabric on the table and my pattern pieces, and we'll be ready to look at the cutting layout for pants B. We're ready to pin our pattern onto the fabric. So, looking at this cutting layout, first thing I need to do is just double check I've got the right pieces. Yep, this is the right width. So this is the picture I need to look at and follow. Next, fabric placement. The fold is down here near my tummy. The selvages are up here at the top. So selvage is at the top, it's folded. So first I'm going to take piece 9. Do you remember how we saw the colors of the diagram to show how the pattern pieces are placed? So this is indicating the pattern is right side up, so I can see and read it plainly. Sometimes they'll be upside down, but all of these are right side up. So I want to conserve fabric as much as possible. So I'm putting this over here. Look at the picture. I've got it up near the top, over to the side. Now, I do not want this edging of the selvage to be in my garment, so I'm moving it over a little from that edge. Now, we talked about grain line. Here's where we use this grain line. I take my tape measure, and I measure from the selvage to the grain line. Here it's 6 3/4. Doesn't matter what the number is, just register it in your mind. I'm going to put a pin there. And I'm pinning through both layers. Now you may have noticed I have a piece of cardboard. It's It's a cutting board for sewing. It's not the kind of cutting board you use for quilting with a rotary cutter. This kind has the grit on it and it's for sewing. So anyway, my pin kind of scrapes the cardboard before to bring it up. So I know I've gotten through both layers. And then so that was, what was that again? Double check. It was 6 3/4. So in order for it to be parallel to there, this also needs to be 6 3/4 down at this end. So there, measure, and it's less than 6 1/2. So I'm going to move this up to the 6. Oops, I'm a little too far. And now it's at 6 3/4. So now I put a pin so that I have the grain line parallel to the selvage. Okay. Now I'm going to start. This part is all centered and straight, so I'm going to go out. Notice how it just smoothed out, and I'll put a pin in. Make sure that your pins are not crossing that cutting line, because then you'll nick your scissors. Okay, at the corners, we're going to pin diagonally. Now again, we've got all these lines here. I'm making size 4. So I see the 3, there's the 4. I can pin there. Doesn't go over the line. And I'll continue to do that. I usually put a few pins out so they're quick and easy to grab. Diagonal at the corner. And here's the triple notch. I'm going to put a pin there. Now you notice I'm putting this way or this. I usually put them perpendicular, so at a right angle to the cut line. Now as I look here, this is the crotch area. Here's size 4. If it would make it easier, I could use my, I don't see it, so I won't use it, my highlighter, but I could highlight that. Thank you. My dear husband found it for me. So I'm just going to show you, there's the 4 with all those lines. So I'm going to pin at a diagonally in that corner. Just keeps things flat when we're cutting. And then here's that notch. I put a pin there. And continue to smooth things out. So I'm going to go back over here, smooth it out. Here's the notch. So basically, I pin at notches, and then I pin about this far apart. So as I continue around here, I don't need to pin at any specific matching dot. I just keep going around. There we go. So notice how I'm just going one direction, smoothing it down. From here out, all the way. I'm looking to see how far apart my pins are. And I'm making size 4. So I'm going to put this at the diagonal right where that 4 turns the corner. Put one in the middle here. Notice I'm not picking the fabric up off the table. I'm actually scraping the cardboard with the pin, and then I poke it up with my finger near there. So I might want to put an extra pin here. Kind of look around, make sure it's secure. And I'm happy with that. Well, maybe another one right over here. Come in this direction. Kind of like to hold it down here. Okay, that one is ready. So now, okay, I've got piece 9. I'm going to do the larger piece 8 before I do small pieces. I always try to fit smaller pattern pieces in what's left over, the room left over after we have our large ones. So I'm going to move this down a little bit. I'm looking at this picture saying, okay, it doesn't quite come up to the crotch. So I get an idea of where it'll be. smoothing out my fabric a little bit. And this shows 8 is right side up. So I'll flip that over. And it shows I'm doing 4, so let me come this way. And it's okay that this tissue overlaps that. We're just going to move it out of our way when we cut, so it doesn't hurt a thing, okay? What determines how far I can go up is this 3. I can't go past my 3, so I'm going to scoot it back down a little bit just to give myself a little more room. And then over here, I know how much room I have. So all these things you're checking to make sure that your pattern pieces aren't overlapping as far as the area that you need to cut out. Now, what's next? To measure the grain line. All right, so does it have to be the same as that one was? No, it just needs to be the same amount from here to here. So I'm checking it this time from the fold, okay? So here to here is exactly 4.5, and put a pin there. And then I go down here to the other end, the grain line, measure, and looking through my pattern piece, it's almost at 5. Let me move that over. 4.5. I moved it a little too much. There. All right. Now double check here before you go put any more pins and have to take them out. So my size 4 is right here. My size 4 is here, so I'm going to be close, but just fine. So I can go ahead and pin the rest. So I'd like you to think about it as you see me pinning. Where would you put a pin? I'm going to smooth this down and put one in the middle. Think about where you would go next. In the corner diagonally. Over here. And my my notch. Now at this point, I'm going to go ahead and finish pinning this. And when I finish, I'll come back and show you pinning the pocket on. We finished pinning pieces 9 and 8. So now let's look at the pocket 10. So here's the pocket. It shows you cutting. Now see, here it says cut 4. You need 2 for one pocket, 2 for the other. As I said, I was surprised there were pockets, so I'm going to cut just 2, meaning I'll have a front and a back of one pocket. And then that way I can show you both methods of with and without a pocket. I need to measure my grain line, right? And even though it's just a pocket, we should learn to follow the guidelines correctly so we always have good habits. So I've got at this end, it's 3.5 inches from the selvage. And I'm going to move this a little bit. So it's 3.5 inches. All right. And then I'll quickly pin this. I've got curves, so I'll pin closer together. Pin at the notch. And diagonal at this last corner. All right, I double check everything's pinned, nothing's overlapping. And so now I'm ready to cut. Now, when I cut, you cut more accurately if the back of your hand is against the cutting line. So in other words, I'm right-handed, I'm going to be cutting this way around. If you're left-handed, you'd be cutting the other way around, okay? So just keep that in mind. And it may be a new habit you're forming, so you're not used to it, but it's actually written in the reference books that that's a hint for cutting more accurately. And remember, when we get to the notches, we're going to go up to the notch, cut out, straight across, and around. So rather than you have to sit here and watch me cut, I'm going to go ahead and I'll be back when it's all cut out. Pieces 8 and 9 are cut, but one thing I noticed, I forgot to tell you earlier, here, is that because I'm cutting a size 4, all of this wasn't needed. So once I cut this off, this part's getting thrown away, I moved my pocket up so that I didn't waste fabric. So now I'll go ahead and finish cutting out the pocket, but I wanted to give you a few tips. When you cut, have the lower blade on the table and try to make long, smooth strokes. So notice I'm not doing little choppy things now. I'm looking for that notch. See how I just used my point, go out? It's okay to turn the fabric as long as it's on the table. So now I've made a little tiny cut around that. So I have a point there. That's what the notch should look like. Okay, continue around. Trim that off just to get it out of the way. And again. I want to be able to turn that around so you could see me cut. So long, smooth strokes, and you can see that I'm keeping the pattern flat so that we're cutting as accurately as possible. There's a double notch, go out, cross, use just the point of my scissors so I don't accidentally cut into my seam allowance. Cut around that, and then continue. And now just this last little bit. So once again, if you were going to do 2 pockets, you need to unpin this, pin it on again, and cut out another set. But I'm just going to show you 1 pocket on one side and plain on the other. Once you finish cutting, leave the pins in until after our next episode when we do the marking. So let's talk about episode 5. We're going to transfer the markings from our pattern piece onto the fabric. We're going to learn about seam finishes, and then we'll actually begin sewing our pants.